Okay, well, we have an awesome guest today with us, all the way from Texas. Jordi Riera is here, and he works for a company called Kaneka, and they are one of the world's largest probiotic companies. They're one of the first to employ the sort of idea of precision probiotics, and so really calculating what you're going to do with a probiotic and then figuring out how to do that. So he's going to definitely talk about that much more eloquently than I just did. He's up here in Canada. They were at the, what's the name? So the Probiotic conference. I got some notes here because this is going to be a good podcast. So the Probiotic conference in Vancouver, and that's Jordi was on one of the panels there. And so it's a big conference, and we got to rope him over to do a podcast, which he was very happy to do. So we're grateful that he's here. There's lots of fun things to talk about today when it comes to the gut microbiome. That affects everybody, everybody and their dog as well, right? So there's lots of fun things we'll cover. And I don't know, I think we'll start maybe just, that was a bit of an introduction on Jordi, but where he came from before he entered into the workforce was he has a Master of Science in Biotechnology and then a degree in economics as well. And I asked him about this earlier, but I'd love to hear it again. It's always neat when you are talking to an expert and you kind of wonder how they got there. And maybe you could share with me and the listeners again, Jordi, just how you came to be where you are now.
It was a spontaneous thing. So we at that time, probiotics were not really widespread like they are now, and people now understand very well that microbiome is important, and you got to take care of what you eat, and that there is a whole ecosystem of microorganisms living in there. But at that time, nobody spoke about that, and when you said probiotics, people would immediately associate that with diarrhea. So I get antibiotics, so you just have diarrhea, and probiotics help me with that. And the other thing is that people would think about probiotics as yogurt. So I get yogurt gives me my probiotics, which is not the case. It doesn't follow the definition. So it was just by chance, and I had the chance to join a startup, Abiotics, that was really working in a different way to do probiotics, in a way to make them better and to make them do more things. And it was an intuition that at the time it was not obvious because, again, probiotics were digestive health, immune at the most, and now we did pretty cool stuff that you have on the table. So we can talk about that.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that with antibiotics and things like that. That's actually the first time I ever was introduced to probiotics is when my appendix ruptured. And I had to have emergency surgery, of course. And I went to see a naturopath. This was 2007. And I went to see a naturopath, and they gave me these little pearls. Do you remember what strain was in the pearls? You remember that product, Jason? There was.
I don't remember that.
It was.
Yes.
I'm sure it was an acidophilus, I think. But I just remember getting that from him, and it was this little white thing. And I thought, okay, well, I'll take that. And I got some IV vitamins that day as well. But
acidophilus is in 3,800 products in the US.
3,800.
Wow. Doesn't do a lot, I can tell you. It's like a very legacy strain.
Okay.
Well, I remember the first time I got exposed to, and we're talking about the first times, was probably about 30 years ago. And it was, you had the naturopathic blends versus what you saw on the shelf, which was a lot different than you see now, but still. And they talk about the ones on the shelf are just like broad spectrum, throw and hope, and they're based on the dairy industry. And then there was a company that I remember called Claire Labs, and they were human strains. And then the person, a friend of mine, who's very educated, he was actually an educator for the naturopathic industry, educated me in the difference. And then it just made absolute sense for microbiology and just even thinking which ones have viability and that kind of thing. Anyways, I was sold 30-something years ago, and there's a big difference. But it was also because that's what the naturopaths, when they were using it, saw versus these huge amounts. So anyways, I'm really interested to see what you have more to say because I didn't get to see on the last training to see where we go with what we're talking about here versus that old dairy throwing hope for the best.
But we spoke about that before. There's an intuition, right? So your gut, your gastrointestinal tract has a limited real estate. So it's limited in space. It's like if you have a garden, a plot of land, and you got to do something there. So it's limited in space. If you try to plant in a limited area, you're trying to plant something, trees, I don't know, or a plant, or a flower, or a crop, whatever. You try to plant it, you're going to do unlimited amounts there because they compete for nutrients, they compete with each other, they need some spacing, and sometimes you need to have another plant that will have this one, and that's a complex equilibrium that you need to keep. So it's a balance. And when you put this insane amount of bacteria in this limited amount of space, intuitively, you may think that it doesn't do anything. But again, this bacteria will compete for the nutrients of the other bacteria that are good there. And another part is that when you apply a probiotic to somebody, you are not expecting that probiotic to substitute the own bacteria that you have. Everybody has a different microbiome that is per se good, and everybody's having different. And you don't want that to be equal, to be commercial, to be like something that you administer in a capsule. When we do a probiotic, it's something that will fix through a very particular mechanism some issue, some disbalance of this equilibrium, and that it will do it in a very precise way. When you do this rough application of multiple billions of microorganisms into the gut, the best it can happen that they don't do anything. The worst it can happen is that they can contribute to making it less balanced.
Just like I was thinking about that when you're talking about that, there's a contact inhibition where you have two strains growing together in nature, anything that you're come up against each other, and there's going to be some type of buffer. It reminds me of the development of cancer, where you have that cell-to-cell contact inhibition. When two cells come close together, when they're dividing normally, that they inhibit growth, and that's how they balance. And then cancer cells have just lost that ability. They don't have cell-to-cell contact inhibition. Then you get an overgrowth, which is a mass or cancer cell, which reminds me of what you're talking about too. If you don't have a proper balance in your microbiome of other species keeping each other in check, one grows into like a mass overgrowth and cause all these problems, just like cancer cells. They're very similar in that way.
There is a condition called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth that is related to that somehow. But in any case, they compete for nutrients. So you have the limited amount of nutrients, and this limited amount of nutrients will make one thrive, the other one not. And that's the point here is that the probiotics that we take commercially are not supposed to substitute what's in there naturally.
Yes.
Are there supposed to fix or to activate mechanisms that will deliver benefits, particular benefits. So I think that the whole idea, conceptually, marketing-wise, and we talk about the industry, that there's other types of incentives to create these type of products, but marketing-wise, the whole idea is, okay, I'll create a very potent, and I hate that word, but very potent formula with high-count CFUs, with lots of strains, because what I want to do is administer a new gold standard microbiome in my consumers. And that's false. That's not honest scientifically.
It just keeps getting more and more and more every year. It changes.
Yeah. And how can there be a study on 15 strains? It's hard enough to do a study on 3 strains, right? Selectively choosing those. So when you've got 15 strains in there, which is very common now.
15, it's a low number. You see it in 30 and 40 and 60 strains, and there's no way you can find all of them there. The other point is that they've never been studied together.
Yeah.
So that insane amount of strains.
Yes. Cause an imbalance. And that's where I say, when you guys were talking about this before, that we get caught in the more is better. We were discussing other ideas. And when the ancient way is not more is better, balance is better.
Yeah.
And I think that's if balance is better, it makes absolute sense. So many people and so many things are doing the more is better. This is preaching to the choir with most people. We still do it. With you mentioned earlier, talking about the probiotic side of our industry, the whole health and wellness industry, was one of the first to go ballistic on that. Is every year it gets more. It went from the millions to the tens of millions to the hundreds of millions to the billions to the tens of billions to the hundreds of billions.
That was an arms race, and it's still going on. Unfortunately, it started to go in now. But actually, today in Probiota, I was asked at my panel. I was asked, if you have to fix one thing in our industry, what would you fix? I said, guys, put down the arms race with the CFU count. That's stupid. But the point is that, big manufacturing groups of probiotics, and we don't manufacture ourselves. We have subcontractors, and we are not in the business of high counts. Right? Volume is always good, and we all want to sell more, but we are not in this business. But the big manufacturing groups, they have huge fermentation systems that cost hundreds of millions of dollars that they need to run 24 hours. And they need to sell more and more and more bacteria, regardless of the bacteria. So they don't care about what bacteria they manufacture. They care, obviously, but the point is to have the machinery on and going. And that relates why the industry evolved to creating these huge count CFU products.
So they went quantity. It's quantity, not quality, instead of the other way around. That's the insanity of what. And it comes in every other. And then people get into that thing in the sports industry too, because both of us have been in sports, where you think, hey, this one does this, it increases your testosterone this much. I think I should take 3 or 4 times more. I bet it will do that. It doesn't. It just causes nausea and gas and bad problems.
Well, it's not the same if you take a shot at the kilo, you take 35. So
That's right.
And I want to jump on a word you said earlier, ancient, right? So I think that's a really important part of this to talk about right away, which we have been talking a bit about today, Jordi, and other conversations, is ancient strains. That's what you guys essentially sourced, right? At Kaneka and at AB Biotics before that, right? That was the goal here, right? Was to find these ancient strains that are missing in populations, was part of that, right? And then I don't want to spoil all the fun here, but I do know that also those ancient strains that are existing there in these healthy populations that Jordi's going to elaborate on here, they were performing extremely well when they were taken into the lab.
I like the story.
Yeah, no, sure. And actually, the intuition is very easy to understand. So as modernization went through, as we started incorporating antibiotics and washing our hands and having cleaner homes and not being so much in contact with dirt and eating processed foods and living in stressful conditions, all the thing that encompass the modern lifestyle, and especially westernized diets and so on. When that started, diversity went down, and that's clear in multiple papers. Diversity of our microbiome going down. And at the same time, there was an significant increase of multiple conditions and diseases, from IBS, IBD, ulcerative colitis, autoimmune problems, allergies, and eczemas, and lots of things that basically our body was not competent to keep the homeostasis of the own organism. And there is a very strong correlation between both. It's hard to elaborate that because there's a big timeline that you would need to follow. But if you see the epidemiological data and the history data, it's quite clear that there is a relationship with that. And the intuition was, okay, since we cannot travel in time to the past and try to bring these microbes back, what we could do is try to look for people that is still living in present times, anywhere in the world, in isolated populations, conditions, locations, in these pre-modern lifestyles, in rural areas, that it would eat whole foods, would eat traditional fermented foods, that would not be so much in an aseptic environment. And these people was preserving much better the microbes, as we used to do generations and generations ago. So collecting samples of these people allowed us to find some of these microbes. That actually, that's a theory, this correlation between Western conditions and modern lifestyle and issues related to the lower diversity of microbiomes. It has a name. It's called microbial all friends theory. And before that, it was hygienic hypothesis, and that was more related to cleanliness of our environments. But that's a little bit the explanation how particular types of bacteria can perform much better than the acidophilus that we were saying before.
That was neat how you said that, because you brought in the word hygiene, and obviously they found out, a lot of the credit that's taken by modern medicine, say for all the advancements in getting rid of bacteria and all that kind of thing, just coincided with better hygiene. So even in the streets and sanitation, and that our industry, say the whole health industry in modern times, is based on the traditional medicines, but it's also just based on the natural hygiene movement, which was a lot to do with the gut, what we're talking about, of cleansing and nourishing the gut over and over and over to get effects through your whole body. But you also said one thing that's interesting. So say you said, if I'm thinking about the way that a modern person's, their gut microbiome. So basically you're looking at their digestive microbiome, and then you'd study that, say in biochem, right? So we're studying that, we're looking at blood markers, how these things are affected. And then you would graph it, and you would look at that graph, and you would get a statistical average, and you're drawing the line. But you would have outliers on that graph. And typically with outliers, remember what we did in labs, you just basically cancel them. There must have been a mistake, so you cancel them. So then what I'm thinking about right away with that, because I remember thinking about that, what actually is the outlier though? Because if you're measuring blood pressure, blood cholesterol, blood sugar off the average norm, which is based in modernity, which has so many dysfunctions and imbalances. If you brought the person from South America living in an ancient way, and then you measured their biochemistry to everybody else here, they would be an outlier. They'd be one that you canceled off and said it doesn't matter. But in reality, they matter more than anything else because that's what's actually going to bring us back to restore us to the ancient way, what you're talking about. So I think that's fascinating, because what we're talking about here is getting right back to the roots. In ancient times, they focused on how things affected you when you ate, what times you ate, what was right for your constitution. But they knew if you see ancient writings in Chinese medicine, Tibetan medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, they knew that there was microbes living in your gut. They worded everything, and they knew how to nourish and feed them. They already knew that. So we're kind of like, you're returning to ancient ways just to find balance.
I mean, in many ways, many civilizations around the world understood that fermented foods were good for your health.
Yes.
They may not know that there are tiny microorganisms that are living there, because they couldn't see them, they couldn't evaluate that they were there, that would just turn into. But they saw that when food went through fermentation, and that happened in Korean kimchi, it happens in fermented products in Africa, it happens in Europe, in yogurt, in kefir, in pickled vegetables. All of this has an impact for the health of the body, and that's not something modern. That's very traditional, and that is obviously associated to how these. Well, no probiotics by definition, fermented foods are different things, but in a way has a similar mechanism. The probiotics is the refined scientific way to translate that into the modern world.
Yes.
But that knowledge, that saviness, it exists in centuries and centuries ago.
Yeah, and they even knew thousands of years ago. This is interesting. If you have in different meditative cultures, when they talk about meditation, and they use examples of your perception, this ties back. It's crazy, but it ties back. They knew thousands of years ago that there was microbes living in your gut, because they would give examples to say, you look at that piece of poop, right? You think it's disgusting, right? That's a perception. The flies that are all over it, eating it, think it's amazing. And the microbes that live inside your body, it's just part of their environment, like a fish in the sea. So I feel like they already knew that was happening. They already knew, however they knew it, that there was these tiny, weeny little microbes living there. So whatever happened to all that tech, and to know that they're in there, and to think, what are they doing? Like when we talk about prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics, short chain fatty acids and compounds that they give off and that affect your whole being. But they also use the example in the Indo-Tibetan side. They use the example of the fact that who really are you if all of these organisms are sharing the existence with you, and they're affecting you as a person in moods and digestion and your endocrine system? Who really are you? Can you say, what do you actually say is you? So even that they knew as an example 2,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago. It blows my mind that we have to come back. We went so far off track that they even knew that, and now we're coming back. So it feels like when I'm talking to you, and I've known you for a while, it's because you're smiling all the time and you're a very smart guy. It just feels like we're talking about something that people want to know. We're going back to our roots, but in a way that's really cool, because now you have a lot more that you can say about it and understand it, rather than just use examples like I did in an arcane way.
Yeah, no, sure. And actually, you touched on points. For example, we always said that talking poop when we speak probiotics. So bear some patience with us. But there is a very modern technique to treat conditions and diseases that are not easy to treat with other ways. That is about fecal transplantation.
Yep.
There is a less polite way that put the poop of a healthy donor inside your rectum. And that cures diseases.
Yes.
That cures Clostridium difficile that are multi-resistant to antibiotics. And in animal models, we've seen that it can fix obesity and that it can help react better to cancer therapies. And it's amazing.
Do you think that's because it's so rich? The poop is so rich in that when it goes in, the body's just like... Whoop.
So in some bodies, the microorganisms are so messed up that you need a transplant. But like it happens with anything else. I mean, when you have your garden and it's plenty of bad weeds, you perhaps will not be able to fix it with just precision interventions. You need to remove all of them and just put the good ones.
Is there certain environmental toxins or things that you know of that are more damaging to the gut microbiome than others? Like, I mean, there's glyphosate, Roundup, which we know is probably causing some issues there. But are there other environmental toxins that people can maybe be aware of?
Well, not even toxins. There are types of food.
Yeah,
We know
okay.
that sweeteners have a very bad impact in microbiome and in gut lining, in the gut barrier function.
Like aspartame and those sort of.
Yes, and other components. Yeah, glyphosate is one, but modern food has that bad impact in our health because it has all the composition of things that are allowed by law, so not toxic theoretically, but they have a very bad impact and very big hit on the microbiomes.
What about alcohol?
Too as well.
Yeah. So small amounts are still okay, or is it?
It's a fermented food, right? So,
Yeah.
It depends.
Oh, do you know the book Entangled Life by oh my gosh, I'll remember his name in a second. Sheldrake.
Rupert Sheldrake or the
Merlin,
son?
his son. Is it Merlin?
Melvin or Rivers?
Yeah, Merlin. It's a really cool book called Entangled Life, and it's about probiotics, essentially, right, and about bacteria. And so he's in this field anyway. Really cool story is how they would play around with different strains, and they would make alcohol with different strains, and then they would take the alcohol to parties where people knew they were going to bring alcohol, and they would get their friends of theirs, and they would get to try their alcohol they were making. But they were actually observing scientifically to watch the people's reactions to it, and they would see certain things different people would react to differently, but in general, people would react all together in the same way. There'd be more calm and sort of like contemplative conversations, or there'd be some alcohol that people be more like dancing and more excitable and stuff like that. So that's just alcohol that was having that effect, but using specific strains.
But it can be related to that. I mean, most of the serotonin of the body, I think it was 90% or 90% of the serotonin of our bodies is produced in the gut. And a big part of it by microorganisms that would live within us. You need to think that the whole microbiome, just the gut microbiome, weighs more than 3 kilos on an average person. It weighs more than the liver or the heart or the brain.
And that's everything on our skin.
It's an organ per se. There's twice the number of cells of microbes in our body than human cells. So we need to start thinking about this as a complex ecosystem that builds essential life functions for our body.
And instead of giving different strains that aren't even in our body normally, in hundreds of billions of counts.
Yeah, of course.
So why am I going to do that? Why? Because that's the issue that is interesting. Because once you've latched onto the more is better thing, instead of the balance is better, like the ancient way. The modern way gets people trapped into more is better, like the myth of progress kind of thing. More is better, more is better, more is better. So it's hard to like step out. But once you get the idea of balance, how do you step out of the idea in the probiotic field that when I'm looking at a probiotic and on there, the cost of one is the same as the cost of the other, but in one, I'm getting 150 billion per cap. The other one, I'm getting 3 billion per cap.
But you know I mean? I'll change your vision on that, and that's very intuitive for anybody. That is, if you need multiple trillions of one bacteria to achieve an effect, while with another, you just need few billions or 1 million.
Yes.
It's because this one is weaker.
Yes.
The strains don't do anything. You just have to blast with a huge amount just to achieve the same potency in the effect as you do with some that has been clinically researched at a given dose.
Actually, that's an easy example. Then you talk about alcohol. You have to drink a lot more beer than you had to do hard stuff. And so you're going to save money.
Not for a healthy outcome, but to have the same amount of fun.
But it is the same idea. And I feel like I think with some common examples, if people see that is a common example, you think that's true. And also the idea of strains, because, you know, we're big mushroom guys, and there's so many different strains of a mushroom that you know. And some strains have really no benefit. They're bred for taste, for texture, and for viability on shelf life, right? And then other ones have these massive levels of active compounds, but they don't taste so great. But which one you can take depends on what you're taking them for. And if you're taking it for medicinal benefit, take the other one. It tastes crappy. Maybe it doesn't. So I'm thinking that fits with the same with the probiotic, is that you have these different strains that really mean nothing. They're more like a used old beater.
Yeah. In the industry, we call them fillers.
Fillers, yeah, exactly.
But this is the name they have.
Yes. So why would you want to take a filler? if you could take
But you don't tell that to the end consumer. You
Yeah.
just tell them, hey, buy my product because it has more of this. But it's
CFU,
essentially
CFU.
doing the same thing as the maltodextrin next to it.
So this enters now we enter into the precision probiotics
Yes.
conversation, right? So we're talking about these strains and how the body reacts with them, and that's fine. What we're saying is 3 billion can be more effective than 300 billion. But how do we know that? Well, we know that because Kaneka has exceptional clinical studies on these things, right? And some of the endpoints that they go for are improving quality of life, improving IBS symptoms. These are serious things that are really prevalent out there in society, right? So that's another thing that I wanted to say is, well, we kind of touched on it before, is if you've got a product with 15 or 30 strains in it, you don't necessarily know which one of those strains is doing that, right? So at Kaneka, everything's precision. So could you maybe explain what precision actually, just detail that a little bit?
And to the point of clinical studies, right now, today, we're running over 32 clinical studies in different locations of the world, developing some existing products with new evidence and some new products based on this concept of precision biotics. And it's no longer just probiotics, postbiotics, prebiotics, symbiotics, but there's other areas that are being explored, like the virome, for instance. The viruses that live within us, and they also contribute to this balance. And it's a whole new, passionating area that will open at some point. But yeah, related to that, we do a lot of research trying to focus on not just the end benefit, but to understand the mechanisms that drive this benefit. Because at the end of the day, one strain does something. It's a tool, right? It's a biological tool to have an effect on a particular mechanism of the body. And some strains, actually, there's a good example that I'm often using, that one strain of Lactobacillus plantarum, like the one we may have on this product, for instance, can be a super producer of lactic acid, to simplify the mechanism, and another Lactobacillus plantarum will not produce lactic acid at all. So one will be great for vaginal health, for instance, because lactic acid is great to control bacteriovaginosis pathogens. And the other one can be used for oral health, where lactic acid can be harmful for your teeth. It's the same species, but two different strains with different mechanisms and potentially different benefits as well.
And that's right. So if for anybody, there's obviously people that understand a lot of this, and some people are listening. If the way that we do it sometimes with the mushrooms, say if there's the genus and there's a species and then there's strains. A lot of people don't even know about the strains. Say that we're Homo sapiens.
That's the important thing.
Right? It is the important
thing. The example is the dog, right? I have a dog.
Yep.
What's that dog? Is that a Chihuahua or a Great Dane?
Exactly.
If you want to keep strangers away from your house, you better have the Great Dane. If you just want to carry the dog around with the planes and everything, Chihuahua is fine. Nothing against that. But both are dogs.
Yes.
Same species.
Yes.
Okay. Canis familiaris. But it's not exactly the same what the species relates to a probiotic than the strain relates to a probiotic than the breed to a dog. But it's a good example of how the same species can have a very different phenotype.
One of our PhDs in the mushroom industry, he uses the example of a Beethoven strain versus someone who's never played an instrument and they're playing the drums. It's that same kind of idea, is that you're literally going for the luxury car strain or the Beethoven strain, what you're talking about. And I feel like if people understood it's that simple, but how many strains there could be of one species can blow people's minds. And then, so that's the thing about precision. You have to look and do tests and long-term data, and also look at these cultures to see which strains are more prevalent and which strains of that maybe same species are prevalent in us. And we're unhealthy and they're really healthy. Let's see. And that's what that you've been doing. And I feel like this, I think another thing too is that because I didn't listen to the last conversation, is if people understand the difference, say, between modern ways of thinking and ancient ways of thinking, when it comes to healing, they're very stark contrast. Is, say, modern medicine we thought of as you stimulate something, or you suppress it, or you cut it, or you burn it, right? And so it's more about really strong compounds that do one or the other, or if you can't deal with it, you cut it or burn it out. And then modern medicine would be about more cleanse, nourish, and balance. And it has to do with, say, the two different theories, which is funny. the idea of the germ theory is the modern way of thinking, and then you want to kill stuff, right? Instead of trying to balance and try to find why is that thing overgrowing, what's going on. And what we're talking about right now is the ancient way, which is the terrain theory, right? In modern times, you call it. You're talking about how do we influence the epithelial tract? How do we influence the mucosal barrier that they all live in, this microbiome? And how do we balance out the microbiome, especially if we don't even have any of those strains in it? You mentioned one cool thing that I maybe want to touch on later, because you brought up Sheldrake. And Rupert Sheldrake, if you ever have listened to the guy talk, he's a PhD biologist. He is a brilliant, brilliant man, super soft-spoken English. And he had the concept of morphic resonance, that when things come into close contact with each other, or there's sort of a tipping point, 100 monkey syndrome, that you can get some type of event that spills over. You brought up with the alcohol idea of how it affects different people. And well, say if you're getting people, not only, this is an idea that's kind of interesting, which I don't know enough if you have anything on it, is that say one person in an environment gets really healthy, say in these ancient cultures, and say the others weren't, that if you get really healthy and your microbiome changes and they're producing all these compounds and everything that really actually affect external environments, internal environments, are you actually reaching that morphic resonance kind of deal, or 100 monkeys tipping point where you start, one person is affecting another? Because when you're in an office and you go to an office and you can, your whole biome can change.
But it happens. There are studies showing that people living together synchronize somehow the microbiome. And the synchrony is a whole different thing by itself, but it's true. And there is an intuition behind. I mean, you start eating the same thing, you start aligning in the same emotions, and you are exposed to the same dirt, the same environmental conditions, the same weather, the same. And there is a gradual synchrony on it. Another part is, for instance, when we're born, we are not having a genetic code that will tell us what bacteria will live in our guts. We receive it from the mother, and then from the nourish, and then from later down the road, the food and the contact with the environment. But we keep adopting that as we go. It has like a memory in a way.
Well, it's pretty wild because this is getting deep. I'll let you go.
I got a good question.
It's going deep because you say again, you're saying that if you get exposed to other people's microbiome, whether it's to change a job, change a family, move into a different place, it can literally change the way you think, the way you feel, everything. So it's that who am I question. If you're changing all the time and something like that can change you, it's pretty cool to think. When people think, I think this is such a strongly idea of probiotics, people would not necessarily think at all that taking a probiotic could be as powerful as, say, a statin. They don't even think about that. They say maybe a herb could because it does all the stuff in your blood, but not realizing that if you can actually get something growing in your gut that produces compounds, it's literally part of you producing compounds when it needs to balance you out. That to me is wow.
But because microbiome is beyond adding something external to the body. It's organic, not organic in the sense of an organic food, but it's like biological. It's your body. It's like healing your own cells. It's not your own cells because it's microorganisms, but they live in symbiosis with us.
Yes.
So, and actually that relates to traditional medicine and modern medicine. I was at a conference that a US senator did. I don't remember the name right now, but he was comparing modern medicine with sick care. While we need to care about healthcare, calling modern medicine healthcare is not completely honest, because what modern medicine is really good at is curing disease.
The business with disease, totally.
Yeah. But there's a whole different thing that is caring about health. And caring about health is not something that we do with drugs, typically. We do with all these other factors. And that's why this holistic approach to health that involves food, that involves supplements, that involves even, your mindfulness, your way you face life, it affects the body as much as a drug can do later and down the road.
Yeah.
And everyone knows now, pretty much everyone knows, that you take a drug, you typically have to take another drug if you're doing long-term for the side effects of that drug with another drug. For instance, my dad, he had 6 bypasses. He had a heart attack on the table. He had 6 stents. He had a defibrillator and pacemaker. And then the 8 drugs plus 2 on rotation. But the drugs, there was only a couple of them were actually to treat what they thought they're treating or help them. The rest were all to mitigate the symptoms produced the rest,
And
which
then
were
they
creating
probably
all these
interacted
horrible
with each
things.
other. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's complete opposite way that they would do in ancient medicine. They would find things that coordinate, like you said, to improve your health and synergize and act as in ways of symbiosis, like in the probiotic side, and synergy. We lost that, but I feel like it's just an ancient thing that's in you that you know is right. And when it starts coming back, and to me, when I first got exposed to you're in Kaneka, it was kind of blowing my mind because back in the day when I got exposed to Claire Labs, they were more still focused on the traditional way in modern times of looking at probiotics. It's helpful for your gut, right? Yeah, they are. And that's the thing about these specialized ones. They're still helpful for your gut, but you're getting an actual unique and powerful response on top of that. So you don't have to take all these different strains. You're still going to help your gut, but now it's having a targeted, powerful response. And they didn't talk about that until I actually hadn't heard that until a few years ago, getting exposed to what you're talking about, which totally makes sense to me.
And good for your gut would be more related, in my view, to a fiber, a prebiotic. It's food for your gut, right?
Yeah.
And it will feed any bacteria you have there. Yeah. And you will have some, I'll have different, you'll have different community. That will be full for that. There are also precision probiotics, but that's a whole different thing. And that's what it's supposed to be doing. Not the probiotic. When you add stuff, you need to be very careful and very mindful of what you want this bacteria to do in your gut. Not in a specific way. You cannot expect that it will just balance by design.
So you tell me then. Well, go ahead.
No, I read something a while back, and it was talking about how polyphenolic compounds also.
They are prebiotics as well. Most of them, yeah.
Prebiotics.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're just classified as prebiotics. And
there is a lot of debate about that, okay. but we can agree that they have a positive effect on diversity and in certain bacteria. But yeah.
So for me, the reason, for instance, when I was developing products all those years ago, I was very cognizant of the gut and the epithelial lining. And so my thing was, how do I affect the epithelial lining so that the mucosal tract is keeping things out that shouldn't get in and allowing the proper growth of the microbiome? I've always been aware of that. And polyphenolics have a strong effect on the epithelial tract to heal it and allow it to start producing the mucosal layer, which is so protective, like a gel. Mm-hmm. So for me, the polyphenolics as a prebiotic would be more to do with the health of the terrain that allows for the microbiome then to flourish and start to outcompete other strains. And then polysaccharides would be ones that act like in mushrooms and all the different oats and things like that actually feed the microbiome. Plus, it's pretty neat that polysaccharides, a side note, talking about microplastics and that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Which the microbiome affects. And polysaccharides, in particular, beta-glucans bind, like in oats or mushrooms, bind the forever plastics in your body and take them out. There's research that they've never seen anything else do that. To me, that would be not only the polysaccharides, it would be the microbiome as well, and especially also the health of the mucosal tract, which they're all tied together.
No, there are multiple groups working on that, on how to mitigate the absorption of microplastics, how to try to help the body eliminate them. It's still not there commercially, I would say, but the microplastics thing is a whole new thing to explore and to talk about. But I mean, tell me how we can live not in contact with plastics in the modern world. It's a whole crisis.
It is.
Not to say a revolution to start.
It's crazy.
I want to jump back though before we talked a little bit about living in an environment with other people, and I read some stuff on sports science about that as well, where the children of parents that are really athletic and they don't necessarily get it from the genes, but they actually just through living in the environment, they're absorbing. There's something happening there. The kids actually become more physically able and better at sports if the parents are actually engaging in athletics, not if they used to do it, but if they're currently engaging in it. There's a something that goes on there. And then the next thing, this is something I wanted to ask you about, and it ties into family stuff, is I'm hoping you got some cool stuff here. But when children are born via C-section, for whatever the reason is that happened, they miss out on bacteria from the vaginal tract and getting that. Without going in many directions with that, the one question I want to ask you, if you know anything about is there research around how we can help those people that were born via cesarean to reinstate?
Absolutely.
There is.
Yeah, there is. There are probiotics specific to that. And we've got one that we've proven that helps while you're born in C-section to repopulate the microbiome of the newborn, and help, for instance, not have that big incidence of colic. But at the same time, there are practices in medicine that the newborn is put in contact with the feces and the fluids of the mom, regardless it's born by C-section, because that's the first enrichment and contact he gets with a positive microbiome.
I asked,
and through the vaginal canal, and also exposed to fecal substance, through that situation of the birth, they get a good seeding of microbes.
it was 9.5 years ago, or probably 10 years ago now, that I asked that exact question to the nurse, because our son was born cesarean. That's just the way that birth went. And that wasn't the plan when we went in, but that's the way it went. And then so we went into, and we had 6 years between our children. And so we went in to have the consult before our second child was on the way. And the nurse said, okay, well, you should probably think about having a C-section again, because you had that with your first child. And my wife was like, no, I want to try to do this naturally. And the lady said, okay. And my wife's pretty active and stuff. So I knew that she'd been, physically training to her core muscles and those things that were severed were going to be as strong as they possibly could. And she has really strong instincts, and she's like, no, I'm going to go and do this. And I said, well, even if it does come to cesarean, what about swabbing the vagina and that area for those microbes and putting that? She's like, well, the research is just starting on that, but no, we wouldn't be doing that. And that was, my daughter's 9.5 now, so that was about 10 years ago. So that research that you're saying now that is happening, has that just started recently? Because I always like to know how long it takes for science to be a little bit accepted and then actually be practiced and then get to the public eye.
It gets more in the realm of the medical practice. So it starts to be more understood. But there are many areas of medicine that are being reconsidered, or at least that the practice is reevaluated because of the knowledge of the microbes that live within us. That's one. That's a great example, and many hospitals are incorporating this type of protocols in C-section births. But at the same time, there's another one that is very obvious. That is the dentists. Dentists were basically machines of killing bacteria in your mouth, and you have a microbiome in your mouth that is positive, and that it regulates things beyond the mouth. For instance, there is a clear relation between dysbiosis in your mouth and heart attack. And again, there is science that can relate to that. That is, your microbes in the mouth, if you don't have them balanced, can produce toxins and components that can affect your health beyond the mouth.
And you know what's really good? That if you talk about things on a continuum rather than as static entities, when you think of there's good microorganisms and there's bad, which a lot of people say there's bad bacteria, good bacteria. But the interesting thing of that, when you're talking about, say, in the oral cavity, that's where people can look at what the mucosal layer looks like, right? And the health of that. And when you eat a lot of sugar, what happens to that? Or acidic food, like you said, lactic acid, is that fact of pleomorphism. Like, so there are certain organisms, microorganisms or fungi, I'll use the example of yeast, candida, however you pronounce it first, is that in an environment that has a pH balance and nourished for the ideal system or terrain for that organism, it can be very beneficial to you. But that same organism, if it's in an environment that's exposed to all this poor nutrition, microplastics, all the stuff you have, can convert into what would be considered more of a harmful thing. In the case of yeast, if you have a healthy terrain, healthy mucosa, healthy epithelia, usually for nourishment and exercise and meditation, whatever you're doing to affect that, then it's single celled and it's beneficial for your skin and everything. You have yeast everywhere in your body. When it's in the proper proportion that you said, balance, it's beneficial to you. But then when you have an proper pH balance to the skin,
microbiome,
then it converts into a multicellular fungal element, and that's what people think of as the bad part of yeast. And then it binds into the epithelia, and then you get chronic yeast infection you can't cure because you don't change the actual terrain.
But that's why we never recommend for an immunocompromised patient to take a probiotic.
Because they have to get the terrain to affect and to be healthy somewhat before it can actually implant things that are helpful. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I feel that it's really interesting because it's really, you can't just label things good or bad, but you can say in the proper environment, like you're talking about, that something is really beneficial. And that's where the prebiotic, postbiotic, all these different things come in and the nourishment to go hand in hand with is so much stronger effects. And I feel like the ancients had that again. It's just simple. They would tell you to eat certain foods or certain things and take these fermented things at the same time to get you in a certain state, and then you would flourish.
Well, we have a collection of bacteria that relates to that.
Okay.
There was a collection that comes from Africa, a particular part of Angola. And it's a collection of bacteria that is not coming from directly humans, but it comes from fermented foods. And that these populations in that part of Africa, they had the fermented food that it was in the pumpkin. And that was a food that was originally used or consumed by certain tribes, but it was not consumed by tribes that were nearby. So those that were consuming this fermented food in particular were having a much longer lifespan than the others that were essentially the same biologically, and they were eating almost everything similar, living in the same ecosystem, same climates and everything, but they were not eating that fermented food. That probably was helping them have a much bigger longevity.
Right. And so we're thinking about longevity and everything, and a lot of people, they still think that's like an amorphous, nebulous kind of idea. I don't know. Yeah, but what exactly are you saying it to? So I want to bring it to a hardcore down to earth example too, because I like thinking the way you just said. A lot of people are thinking diseases or prevention is with all this hyper stress and frenetic environment and all the devices and everything that keep your nervous system going, is IBS, so irritable bowel syndrome. And I mean, a lot of people don't label it. You know what? I think a lot of people don't realize that if you don't have to label it. If you want to label it though, a lot of people don't realize that they technically have this irritable bowel syndrome. And when you read up on the different symptom profile of it, it's definitely not something that you want, and it affects your mindset, and it starts to become more like a domino effect. So why don't you tell me about that? That's something that you would want to treat specifically, not just to improve the health of my gut. I've actually got IBS. That probiotic's not going to, you know what I mean? The attitude to say, yeah, I'll take probiotics, they'll help, but it's not going to treat my IBS, because people that have that, like someone who says they have headaches, something helps with headaches, versus someone who says I have migraines or cluster headaches, say that's not a headache. They'll say, yeah, that might work for his headache, but that's not going to treat my migraine or cluster. So tell me about IBS, because that's a hardcore example.
Well, actually, we have a study in stressed adults that were completely healthy, but due to the stress, they were having an induction of diarrhea and symptoms of IBS. And with the same product that we tested in IBS diagnosed patients, we achieved the same type of benefits because of the mechanisms.
So if you can give a few examples of symptoms, because like I said, I don't think a lot of people understand they have IBS because it's a chronic. If you give some symptoms to people out there that don't know IBS per se.
Well, there are different types of IBS. There is diarrhea predominant IBS, there is constipation predominant IBS, or alternate. There are some that basically are having diarrhea the whole through the day, and there's some others that cannot have any bowel movement, and some others that keep changing, and there's like a pendulum.
Like some people throw up when they're sick, and some people get diarrhea.
Exactly.
That kind of idea.
So and that involves other problems like bloating, like pain, like functional pain, acute pain. That there is one way to explain this type of pain that is called visceral hypersensitivity. That we did the research years ago. That still it's the only, to my knowledge, study that has proven that, and that has been considered one of the main endpoints to evaluate IBS. And this visceral hypersensitivity, that a different way to call it is gut-specific anxiety. There is this, internal pain, but it's not like an acute pain that you can relate to one particular spot of your body. It's probably related to the inflammation that is related to the gut lining, the barrier again. And inflammation affects many other things. And it can affect locally, like in the case of IBS and the local pain. But aging and longevity, aging is pretty much an inflammatory process.
And then leading to, if everybody could imagine what Jordi's talking about, if you don't have it, if you have this chronic aggravation of the GI tract, that whatever you eat or do certain things, you're afraid it's going to happen. So you have the susceptibility to anticipate that could do that. Then you think that you start having an issue with just regular foods, then it can result in eating disorders. So then you got a high prevalence of eating disorders, which I had to deal with many years ago. It's so crazy dealing with people that had eating disorders to try to see what is at a root and what can you do for them. That's where I really got into the gut, was thinking about people with eating disorders, what's happening. is this is such a serious issue that even if you start with the eating disorder for some totally different reason, or it comes because all foods start having an issue because you have gut-related anxiety, to me, if you can treat something inside out like that you wouldn't think of as stimulating or suppressing, which all that freaks people out too, that think I can't even take supplements that could cause that. They're afraid to take anything. I've been around these people, they're afraid to take anything. And they'll do things like drink or whatever, so they forget their mind that tells them I'm scared to eat, that literally 1 cap a day of something that's targeted like that can start to completely change a person's life that has IBS or severe lactose intolerance or something in the gut-related anxiety, all that. So maybe elaborate on some of that.
No, that's completely true, and that affects gastrointestinal tract. But as I was saying before, microbiome affects any different parts of the body. And we were speaking this morning about the how microbiome affect hormones, for example, and hormones that can be cortisol when related to gut-brain axis, stress, etc., and estrogens in women. And if you can modulate that, you can modulate the symptoms of menopause, for instance. And that can be done with a microbiome intervention. That can be life-changing to people, to your point. That's true.
Well, and people know today, because of what's happened the last quite a few years, is these genetic therapies, which carry a lot of danger because you don't know what they're going to do. Instead of the idea behind them is that you will insert some type of genetic sequence that then codes for some type of protein or peptides, whatever, that then treats you. But in reality, you could think of it, instead of doing that and not knowing the consequences of those kind of bioengineering genetics, but if you're looking at that, if you look at the premise of it, it sounds good. But you've already got that kind of mechanism that if you have microbes growing inside you, producing those very compounds, and right off the bat, you'll say, well, how much could they produce? When you're saying, you brought up earlier, serotonin levels, a neurotransmitter, they're producing up to 90% of your serotonin. Endogenous serotonin is produced by them. So they do have the power to change your entire physicality, which almost never happens with a lot of different things that stimulate or suppress, almost never. So to me, it's like kind of once you get your mind wrapped around the fact that they've always been with us, that we've disturbed them, that they had this power before to initiate health and act in synergy and symbiosis. Once you get it around it, I think it's really easy to start going, whoa, the potential here is absolutely mind-blowing. And IBS, so say another one.
And then there's the idea of like, we think we know what's going on with these microbes, but then Jordi was explaining to me earlier that they did some research on lactose intolerance, right? And our product can help with that, right? Under Health Canada, we have claims that it helps with lactose intolerance.
And it's recommended by WGO, World Gastroenterology Organization, by the way.
Yeah, that was...
So why doesn't everybody know about it? That's the crazy part. We won't get into that, but...
Well, they will soon.
Good job, guys.
They will now after this podcast episode, right? But you were explaining that you guys were trying to figure out what the mechanisms of action were inside the gut, and you were finding that it's improving lactose intolerance, yet the lactose was passing through the body and not actually getting eaten up by the bacteria or transformed. So what was actually happening there? What did you guys figure out? That it was
basically improving the gut barrier function. So we were improving the one thing that was dysfunctional because of any reason, stress, IBS, whatever, and that was the root cause of the intolerance, the condition.
Yeah.
And by improving that, the body was basically capable to digest this molecule, lactose, that is difficult to digest because in ancient times, when we were in the caves, we were not just milking a cow and eating it out of a bottle. Yeah. We were not naturally used to that. But our bodies are capable to digest that because they're very well adapted to digest different types of foods.
Yeah.
But when your body has this situation where it's weakened by some reason, you need to fix that before you can tackle that. And not just lactose. We were talking before that we did demonstrate the same effect with fructose. And fructose is even more prevalent in the Western world, fructose intolerance, than the lactose intolerance. And people don't know about that. But
yes, and it's ubiquitous.
Corn syrup that is everywhere. It's poisoning in a way the population, causing this type of symptoms. And people has digestive upset and has diarrhea and bloating and pain. Things connected to IBS, and actually it may not be IBS. It may be an intolerance caused by this situation, and probably that's related to a diminished intestinal barrier function that can be related to probably maybe stress or microplastics, but that's less proven yet. But probably they have a big impact too.
And then it can be related to many other things. That's what I'm saying is we think we know what we know now about probiotics, yet we're finding that, okay, this is actually not directly affecting the lactose. It's directly affecting your lining. So what else is that probiotic going to do just by improving the digestive lining? So
and I learned that
the list can be long.
And I learned that you cannot joke about microbiome and how that impacts, because a few years ago we were joking about the fact that probiotics would help many things, but they would never help my hair. But in reality, there are studies nowadays that there are some probiotics that can help the immunitary, cascades that may cause hair loss.
Okay, well, let's keep in touch, man.
Yeah, there you go. Same thing.
So
if you like that, but in a way, I mean, I'm saying that you can joke about that, or even there is an interesting study I read one day that was relating smelly feet with the oral microbiome.
Yes, yeah,
and it was incredible.
Yeah, to change that, because everything's interrelated. And so what we've talked about in different, for those of the viewers or listeners that are thinking, okay, I'm trying to get my head around this, the whole microbiome, what it means, is that analogy we've used in the past ones, the castle, because I think they'll start getting a hold of it, is if you have a castle and you're inside the castle, that's inside of your body, say the walls of the castle, your connective tissue structures, your epithelium, all the different things. And then there's a moat around the castle, and that's basically your mucosal layers through every area that you have an orifice entering. So your mouth to your rectum, the whole tube has like a mucosal aloe vera type, like in your mouth. So does your mouth inside your genital urinary tract, your lungs. And that is and then inside that, if you have a castle and you're trying to keep invaders out, inside there would be alligators, crocodiles, barracuda, piranha, and that's your microbiome. And then inside there too, there's also things that are producing all these materials that you're giving for you to better equip yourself and nourish yourself. That's kind of like what we're talking about here. We're not only talking about the alligators and the crocodiles, the piranha, the microbiome. We're talking about what you're saying with the lactose intolerance. We're saying that it actually is improving the walls behind it, and the moat is becoming more viscous so that things that naturally don't live in there in a great way, they can't get through.
And sometimes we forget that the gastrointestinal tract from the mouth to the rectum, it's not inside our body.
Yes, exactly.
That's outside our body.
Exactly.
When we become an organism, the first thing that this ball of cells do is like folding inside to create a tube, but it's outside our body. And then it develops everything else.
Isn't there like 8 days or something before the small intestine can be distinguished from the brain or something like that? There's
the embryonic development too, right? And
like a period of time where you can't tell what's what. It's just this tube that's forming, and it's the small intestine and the brain.
But thinking about that makes me feel that this is very clear intuition that the gut lining and the intestine over here is as important as our skin. And we would never have an open wound go around because we could get an infection.
Also, so what we said right there, if you take that example in the castle, if that moat dries up, then invaders can start whipping rocks at the base that would have been covered by, try throwing rocks in water to try to hit a wall behind it, they just drop. But if you dry up that thing, you start whipping hard rock, it's going to start breaking up the walls. That's happening inside, like with IBS, for instance, or just any irritation, or if you get sick and you get diarrhea or whatever, that's irritation. Like you said, it could be upwards movement, downwards movement. If you can reinstate that, that's what I was very, very cognizant of before when I saw autoimmune disease progression, is that all these things are entering through that massive surface area. It's massive. It's so much bigger than your skin. I joke about Silence of the Lambs all the time, that the guy when he's making the dress, you can peel someone's skin, you can see how big that is. Or an orange, you can it's a gross example, but you can see how big it is. But if you take from the mouth to the rectum and you flatten all the villi and microvilli and you flatten it out, it is so much bigger than that. And you're eating and drinking and doing all these things, taking different drugs and all this stuff all day long. That's where you're coming into contact. The skin has a mantle that keeps almost everything out easily. But if you're breaching this by stress or drugs or microplastics or a completely dysfunctional microbiome, and they're all tied together, everything's getting inside or irritating that gut lining. And then nothing is fun anymore. You're always dealing with that anxiety related to your gut, leading to all these other conditions which I think people need to be aware too, like to autoimmune disease, to cancer, to dementia, to atherosclerotic arteriosclerosis, all these inflammatory conditions, arthritis, bursitis, tendinitis that you think are no, they're just mechanical. I'm getting out. No, they're actually, you're absorbing tons of compounds that you should never be absorbing.
Well, to that point, I mean, there is no particular intervention that proves that. But if you look professional sports, depending on what you eat, you can get more injured.
Yes. He knows that.
Why?
Yeah.
So
You know that.
it's all related to that.
And I want to talk more about cardiovascular health because that's a huge topic, right? But I got another question I got to ask that I've been burning to ask you, and I didn't talk to you about it yet. But so the appendix, of which I don't have an appendix, but when I did have an appendix, it had unique bacterial strains in it, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, you said yeah. It was
No, what I'm saying is that few years ago, and it's not long time ago, we all considered the appendix was like
Nothing.
nothing that was
Vestigial.
inherited from vestigial. And okay, we'll remove and get rid of it. But we're learning that the appendix probably has a biological function to keep
jumpstart.
the complexity of the microbiome.
Yeah. That's what I was because
It's like Noah's Ark. It's the Noah's Ark of the body. If you have to get the things out there again,
It's like if
starts
you
out.
do sourdough at home, you will keep the sourdough, right? And keep, receiving everything else. So it's
Yes.
like the sourdough dough.
Yes, yeah.
So
Jar, sorry.
yeah. So it does that is what now is kind of established, right? Is it is there as a bit of a storehouse to help when it's needed, right? And slough off into the intestines to give you more.
Yeah, you just keep your discard there just to reseed it in case something happens.
Yeah, reseed, reboot, reseed.
And so for people that don't have an
I don't think that you're screwed, but
Yeah.
but probably it has but it used to have a function.
yeah.
And there's people that has I read somewhere an example of someone that got rid of the appendix because of an appendicitis,
That's what mine
and
was,
after that they started having high blood pressure,
Yeah.
or
See, there you go.
or
Yeah.
people that live with high cholesterol.
Well, it's interesting because mine ruptured. Like I almost died, right? So it totally
So
ruptured.
it was a good decision to take it out.
I had to get that out, yeah. But then I did. I wondered for a long time what the long-term effects of that would be, and then I became aware of this research that, that there may be, it did have a purpose. And so, do you think there's anything that there's no research in the realm of like identifying those strains and trying to,
Well, but again, the whole point, and I've seen a lot of microbiome testing that try to qualify how close to a gold standard you are. And I think, again, that there is no science backing this concept because at the end of the day, everybody has a very different microbiome.
Yes.
So there's no point in identifying what's in your particular appendix because it relates to your body, to your own ecosystem. And again,
Otherwise, you could restart as me if it was mine.
but it's not.
Like, what the heck's going on?
I'm good.
But that's what we see in nature. I mean, there's not the same the rainforest in the Amazonas than the woods here
Yes.
in Vancouver Island.
Yeah.
And it's still two types of ecosystems that are rich and complex and functional and valid.
And you're bringing up the idea here of heart disease. And heart disease, so cardiovascular disease, as far as I know, it's still the number one killer. Stroke, which is heart disease too, is number two killer. Cancer is below that. Maybe this is changing now because all these different things are happening now with these turbo cancers and that. But say heart disease is still a threat, which is interesting because when you try to get people to be preventative with heart disease, it's way more difficult. They'll think about when they have something, treat it, but when they don't. So the idea of statins, which you guys know, I'm not a big fan of statins because I study pharmacology and I don't like the mechanism of action and they're being used in a ubiquitous way now and being promoted more and more. And basically a statin is also called an HMG coenzyme A reductase inhibitor. And it's involved in the production of coenzyme Q10 endogenously. So not you're taking it externally, you're producing it, which is involved in energy cycles, which your heart is heavily dependent on energy cycles.
The mitochondrial
Right?
health, yeah.
And also just protecting overall as an antioxidant. So you're destroying that ability. So you should be at least taking CoQ10 with that. And there's other reasons for that. Off that point though, when you're taking these statins, you can have side effects of loss of memory. I don't know if people know that. If you look at a person in a certain age category and you drop their cholesterol levels to a certain level, they have more of a tendency to have scar tissue and bleeds because that type of cholesterol, and there's many different fractions, as Mark, our friend, has pointed out. these different fractions. It's not just as simple as you have low density lipoprotein and high density. There's different fractions. Some are different than others. But when you lower that, there's things that when you're old, you're supposed to have higher. Number one, the worst fear that most people have is losing their memory, losing their mind. Yet that is a side effect of getting your low density certain fractions too low, which those drugs do. So that's how you can start having memory issues with the statin class use. Also, loss of muscle tissue strength and function. So kind of like what happened in a condition, say rhabdomyolysis or something like that, would be related to, say, overall aging, your muscles are weakening. So you're aging faster, and you're feeling that with the weakness and lack of energy and poor memory. So inevitably, that's a problem. And if you have two people that have a heart attack, I know I'm hammering on statins because I feel like I should, at least you should do the research first, is that if you're taking a statin and you're not, and two people have a heart attack, you're 400% more likely to die of that heart attack if you're on the statins versus if you're not. So that tells you something, that the very premise of statins is erroneous. And I think the meta-analysis is showing that over the last few years, and hopefully that happens faster, but it doesn't seem to be. It seems to be they're even promoting it more, kind of like changing the sugar line basis so that you have to take more drugs to control your sugar, or the blood pressure marker. High blood pressure used to be a certain marker like 160, 150. Now it's dropped to just over 140 or whatever, 130 even. And so they can get these drugs. So what I'm saying is, instead of thinking about that, you're thinking, yeah, but if you still believe in it, because it's in us, like this is what we've been taught. So then can I do something naturally that could still do that though? And I know you say it's bad. But it's still in your psyche. So now I want you to talk about this isolated strain and targeted strains for actually modulating and improving the overall cholesterol and lipid profile of the blood that would be, to a medical doctor, when they look at the data, they would say, this is as strong as a statin. Or at least that you can add it to that because it has a totally different mechanism. So you can talk about that, because I think people maybe have no idea you could use a probiotic for that kind of thing with heart disease.
Yeah, and several things that you said here are important. But yes, probiotic can do that. We proved it in 6 clinical trials and multiple systematic reviews and meta-analysis. You can do it not just effectively, but with mechanisms that are already existing in the body, not like if you take botanical or a drug. And you do that through the way the body has to utilize the cholesterol that is already in there. So without cholesterol, our body cannot function as well. Cholesterol is not bad per se.
Yep.
Many hormones have cholesterol structures, and bowel salts that we were mentioning before needs cholesterol to be built, and we need that for digestion. So the body needs cholesterol, and the body has mechanisms to consume cholesterol. The problem is when there is an accumulation of cholesterol, and in particular, certain fractions of cholesterol that are related to a higher cardiovascular risk, that is related to higher risk because they cause your blood vessels to have sclerosis. And that's the whole point. And now, for instance, the levels of cholesterol are becoming less and less relevant because there are different sizes of cholesterol, different particles.
Can you clarify those subfractions?
Yeah, there is like
what are problematic and what is not.
Yeah, but simplifying, you will not measure anymore. Probably in the future it will be established as the gold standard, but you'll not measure anymore the quantity of cholesterol you have. You'll try to measure how many particles of cholesterol you have, because the particles is what accumulate. And smaller particles are the ones that accumulate in the blood vessels and cause the issue. But it's very hard to count them in blood work. There is a way that is counting the number of apoproteins that they are bind to the particle. Because no matter if the particle is very big or very small, it has one protein, one flag, right? And if you see that there is a lot of cholesterol in absolute value, but a particular number of proteins, you can divide the quantity by the number of proteins and understand what's the fraction of cholesterol that you have. So 2 persons with the same amount of cholesterol, but different number of proteins, will have different types of risk. And the beauty is that we discovered that with the product that we have, we're able to decrease not just the total LDL cholesterol and total cholesterol, of course, but the ones that is the smaller fraction, that is the one that matter for cardiovascular risk. So you don't care about how more or less cholesterol have. You need to focus on what will cause an issue eventually in the long term.
I think what's really interesting too, and how you're pointing this out, how powerful this. Number one, we need to put a diagram on the screen of what we just talked about there. Number two, if people don't think things are powerful enough, if you think you have to take a drug or something like that to treat something because this is way out of proportion, think about just getting a cut and watching your skin heal. If you think about it and you watch what happens, that's crazy.
Happens. Yeah.
It literally blows your mind. That's how powerful things are. And you're talking about basically the same thing, that your microbiome, which has always been part of us since ancient times. It's a symbiosis. You can't actually breach what's you and what's not you, is that it's powerful enough to do that. It always has been. We've been convinced in just modern times that you have to take certain compounds or chemicals to exert those kind of effects. For instance, too, I'm going to go a different example. You see people that are trying to get out of their mind and trying to calm their mind or trying to have a heightened sense of awareness, whatever. So they take drugs to get that all the time, addiction. But you literally can do that with different meditative practices with zero drugs because it's in us already. Basically, you're touching on the idea that the microbiome is already in us. It's our own system's powerful enough to heal your skin, and you watch that and think about it. These things can heal your heart. They can heal your gut, your blood sugar. They can get rid of menopause, serious menopause symptoms, serious headaches that you have, or depression or mood swing. There's different, like you said, different isolates and different fractions for each of those things.
And the other thing is that microbiome changes with the life stages. So a kid or a baby will not have the same composition of microbiome that the same individual will have when they age.
Yes.
And first, there are very interesting studies with super centenarians, like people that live very old in good condition, that one of the factors that are, commonly connected among them, that is that they have particular types of microbiome, particular composition microbiome that help probably this inflammatory process that aging is.
Yes.
And they have lived with much better health than other people that didn't outlive them, And
a lot of those people tend to live in very natural environments as well, right? Like a little bit more quiet. So like Okinawa in Japan or Sardinia and Italy, these, there's outliers, of course, in the middle of New York City, there's people that have these strong microbiomes as well. But but
there's people that try to project that they had a better life, for instance, or they didn't have stress. It's not true.
Yeah.
You see them and they had stress throughout their lives. And they had difficult lives and they had nutrient restriction, but for some reason they have a particular composition of microbiome that have made them age differently, and that's again probably related to inflammation.
Yeah,
and inflammation, it's one of the key answers to why probiotics work in different aspects, along other mechanisms.
I just want to go back to the cardiovascular health for a second, because I'm not, I'm not as knowledgeable as you both in this realm, but like you hear terms like ApoB thrown around, lipoprotein(a). Like can you explain those words?
That's exactly the protein that I was explaining you. That is the flag of the cholesterol particles. But it's interesting that still nowadays, I got blood work for a reason not long ago, and they still don't test it. Most of the times they still don't test it. They still stick to the guidelines.
That's another question.
LDL, HDL, total cholesterol will make a ratio, and okay, your battery are good. And same with weight. There's people that is technically obese or overweight, and they are healthier than super skinny people. Mm-hmm. So BMI is another bullshit. It's probably more related to visceral fat, for instance.
So there's an interesting one to go with that. Is that they did this the follow-up, and they went into these elderly care facilities, right? And then they revisited 10 years later, and they found that almost all the ones that were too slim, not even too slim, just slim, were dead. And the ones that were heavier,
because of the sarcopenia, for instance, and how that impacts the chances that you have to fall.
Right.
And that's why it's important to lift weights.
Yes, totally. Straight.
Since young ages till when you're older.
And that's the thing. So we're talking about obviously mind, body, energy kind of thing. Everything is super important. We're talking about the body, but in effect, what we're getting at is they're actually affecting your energy and your mind, and maybe something that's much more close to home, because people think digestion and everything, but everyone sees their skin and how it changes. And so you put things on your skin, hoping that that's going to help your skin and everything, or you take certain supplements or drugs that you think are going to do something to your skin. We're talking you can get at skin, even that in an impressive, massive way by taking literally what you'd say one capsule. Maybe touch on that too, because again, you got one capsule, which everybody think more is better, but we're going back to that. No, it's not. Balance is better. Effectiveness is better. And
everybody knows about that.
Right. Yeah. So, but what I found, what you said is when you're doing different trials and you use one cap that say has a 3 billion count, or you jump up to say 10 billion, whatever it is, right? That there's virtually no change in the effectiveness. It might happen a little bit quicker, but in the long run, there's no change when you're, say, doing 12-week studies. It's exact same with one cap, yet people think I have to, one cap a day, and it's making such massive impact. To you, I go back to what you said earlier. That usually means that, because the one that I have to take a ton of is way, 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 way weaker. But it's not just weaker, it's basically useless. But people say, well, I take it and it helps me. Well, number one, there is the placebo, and don't get angry. Yes, okay, it could still get effect. But the effects might not actually be from that. It might be from something else that's actually with that thing. Like for instance, there's a meta-analysis on aspirin. And they had all the different aspirins used over all this time, and they're giving you baby aspirin, right? And they noted in the trial that the group that exerted the benefit that they desired when they're recommending baby aspirin for heart disease, that group had the typical flow agent or binding is magnesium stearate, which some people, it had magnesium in it. And magnesium's known to improve nerve activity and heart at very tiny doses. You'd be blown away, actually, the effects of magnesium at that tiny, weeny doses. So I'm thinking back to this. This is a small dose. It's even better than all the other stuff, because once it implants, there's a chance that if you feed it properly and everything ongoing, that it's going to keep on exerting the benefits.
Yeah, and it depends on the strain. There are strains that you 100%. Want them to stay and to have long-term presence in your gastrointestinal ecosystem, and some strains that you want them to have an effect and go.
Yes.
So it relates again to the mechanism. So that's why, for instance, there are probiotics that I would recommend to take forever, long-term, because it will keep up getting your body at the right place. And some other is, okay, I have a problem, I'll take that probiotic, I'll get rid of the problem, and I'll get rid of the probiotic, and I'll let my ecosystem go.
Like you don't have menopause, so you wouldn't need to take it.
Yeah, exactly. But for instance, that's a good point. But for instance, the same mechanisms of the estrabolum, and estrabolum it's a big word, and the definition is that it's the fraction of bacteria that regulates the metabolism of estrogens, and that's bacteria related. But the same mechanisms, there are a couple of them, but the same mechanisms can condition the absorption or regulate the metabolism of other hormones like testosterone. So there is an enzyme in particular in the estrabolum that is called beta-glucuronidase, and that enzyme basically does the function of flagging estrogens that will be eliminated, and the body recognizes them and they reabsorb it and get it back to the bloodstream. That way you recirculate them and you don't lose them. So this same mechanism acts with testosterone. So testosterone will be eliminated, and that way you can reabsorb it, and that affects.
That's the cool part again. That fluid nature of reality that people don't really like. For instance, testosterone, the enzyme aromatase converts into estrogen, and so if you want to increase your testosterone load, you can have an aromatase inhibitor. But it's the same idea. I think a lot of people don't realize what estrogen and testosterone
and we have estrogens as men, and women has testosterone.
Just different ratio.
We need it, different ratio.
And they said that's interesting that women become more like men in their profile of the ratio of testosterone, and men become more like women over time. Typically, I'm stereotyping. So because our ratios are changing. And again, there you see something as simple as zinc can impact that ratio and how it changes, just getting enough zinc. But I'm thinking deeper now, because the probiotics are fascinating to me. It's like it's next level, changing your system so that it's doing what it's supposed to be, like in an ancient culture, which is where you're getting the strain's from. I feel like it's a no-brainer. It also makes you feel good because it makes you feel like I'm doing something right for my body and I don't even know all the benefits I'm going to get from this.
Yeah.
And if you look at the ancient cultures, well, they're obviously getting a lot of different benefits. I don't know. And so like you said, some things like when we're talking about the GI product. And if you can take one a day, that is so simple and you don't even have to refrigerate it.
But
Same idea.
The correct. So 2 points to that. One is think always about the mechanisms of these strains and how mechanisms can impact benefits
Many
that
things.
we didn't prove yet in science, in clinicals. This product, for instance, was originally developed for IBS.
Yeah.
And people would take it. But then we discovered that the same mechanism impacted the lactose intolerance. And after that, the fructose intolerance. And after that, we high-performing athletes.
Yeah.
And probably in the future, we'll discover that it helps side effects of GLP-1s or whatever.
Yeah. Which is huge. That's a huge topic there.
Did you hear earlier when Jordi was saying there's research now, the trial's underway for the ultra marathon runners, and so that I found fascinating, which is this product again, right? Getting more clinical studies done on it. So what they're showing, right, and you elaborated a little bit before, is that it's, and let me try this. So let me try to word it in my way so I can teach myself and teach everybody, and then Jordi can clean up what I said. Is when you exercise, especially intense exercise, and ultra marathons would definitely be considered intense, not like sprinting intensity, but totally different intensity. The blood shunts away from the digestive tract, and with that, this is a point I never tied together in my head before, but with that blood goes all the vitamins and minerals and other compounds that are in the blood that are protective and supportive, and that's going out to your muscles so you can do that silly thing that you're doing, and your body thinks it's silly anyway, so it's helping you do that, takes away from what's in there, and then that leaves the gut vulnerable. And over time, say 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever hours in the ultra marathon or in an Ironman, like I've experienced many times, Ironman triathlon, you can have serious digestive issues. So there's now research showing that it's, again, coming back to that same one of those same mechanisms of helping that gut lining, right? That's where the research is on this clinical.
Exactly. And we did that, we finished, and it's in the way of publication. So it impacts the way you describe.
Well, it's funny because we were talking on the way over, and I just did the BC bike race, which is a 7-day stage race, right? And we've already been talking about poop, so I guess I can talk about diarrhea too. So on day 6, day 6,
I wake up. Picture of you running and a whole long tail of stuff going out of your ass. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I've seen some things in Ironman triathlons that. People didn't make it to the bathroom, that's for sure. But I woke up on the 6th day of this 7-day stage race, and I had loose stool going, and I was like, oh, gee, that's not great. I felt fine otherwise, right? And I was explaining to Jordi and our friend Mark, I did have challenges eating, because and I was like, what is that, right? But my stomach, my body was just, I think, trying to stop me from going out to do that for the 6th day in a row, right? But I did. I had some really loose stool, and thankfully it kind of all sort of cleared out, and I was fine when I was riding, and that happened the next day as well, the 7th day. And if I could have, I don't know why I didn't really think about it. I have used our intensive GI in the past, but I don't take it regularly. But Jordi, you're thinking if I had a preloaded for a week or a month before, I could have potentially continued to take it during the race.
Yeah, I would not guarantee that you will have win the race, but probably would have helped.
You want to hear something?
It's huge because the amount of people that experience this, right? If you stood at the finish line of, and this is totally true, this isn't my words, this is somebody else's words, I can't remember, but if you stood at the finish line of an Ironman triathlon and you said, oh, how was your race? How was your race? How was your race? Most of the people that finished across the finish line that didn't have their ideal race, it wasn't the training. They put in the time. They did that. The people that get to the start line of that, they've put in the time. They were like crazy enough to already do that, right? So they put in the time. It was digestive health that limited them, right? And so that's a huge thing.
This ties another thing that ties directly to this is if this was a big thing back in the 80s, right? Is people took steroids. That was a big thing. All the bodybuilders and all these different people took steroids. And then you see what happened to them. So a common thing that happens with excessive steroid use, not just boils and all the other stuff that happens that people live through, is that they end up with things like inflammatory bowel disease or irritable bowel syndrome. And one of those things, one of the mechanisms is is it increases the blood flow away from the GI tract, because the GI tract mucosa will donate amino acid profiles and peptides, in particular glutamine at high levels, to the muscle unnaturally. And so that causes breach in the gut, and all the microbiome, everything else is affected, all the nutrients, same thing. What you're talking about is intense athletics has a similar effect, driven by your own athletic pursuits at a heavy, hard level. It drives stuff from your gut because it's an easy place to get stuff. So now, for a long time, then steroids got this, they were poo-pooed and nobody's doing them anymore. Then all of a sudden, for quite a few years, you're hearing all these people are taking steroids again, like tons of them. So for people that are taking steroids and have developed Crohn's disease or irritable bowel syndrome or diverticulitis, diverticulosis, whatever, right? This could be something that could massively improve that, because it's the exact same mechanism as you're talking about. One's induced by an exogenous drug, one's induced by endogenous activity and athletic performance outside the norm. They're both outside the norm, but they both have the same effect on the gut. So basically, I'm saying, wouldn't it be cool to go into that too? It should be the exact same thing. 1 cap a day, 12 weeks changes your whole life of a bodybuilder or somebody, or a weightlifter, or somebody just taking steroids, a young kid that's gut is completely wrecked, right?
Yeah.
Just 1 cap of that, 12 weeks, boom. They thought they had screwed themselves forever. And you know what it's like? So somebody does steroids and they're doing it just for because they want to be bigger, or there's whatever, and you're young and all that kind of thing. You feel like, did I screw myself up for life? And they don't tell their parents and everything either that they did it, because they think that's bad. So their parents are trying to figure out what happened, what's going on. You're going to the hospital and stuff. It just could literally be they're taking steroids. They don't want to talk about it. Yeah. That's another area I'd like to pursue that, because I feel like that's the same mechanism.
Yeah. Again, you root cause, so it's always a mechanism.
Yeah.
So what do you guys focus on? Like, do you have a team around you, Jordi? Like, what do you guys, what does your day-to-day life look like as
we have a
scientific officer in this sort of realm?
We have a great team here in the US that is mainly focused on market development in US, but also we do innovation here locally, because the interest of US and Canada markets is different than other parts of the world. But then we have a very big, numerous team in Barcelona where the project started, mainly also market development, but also marketing, science team. We have science team dedicated to preclinical, science team dedicated to clinical trials. As I was saying before, we're running 32 clinical studies right now in different parts of the world. And then we have also another team in Japan that works also at the level of preclinical science, innovation, fermentation. We have a very numerous team working in different areas, but we've always tried to be a little bit at the edge of research, developing products that are not having an equal in the market, or if they have an equal, to pursue mechanisms that are different. And so we've always liked to be first. We've been first to launch the cholesterol probiotic 15 years ago when the market was not ready for that. Yeah. Nobody believed us. Yeah. Now the market is ready. And every day that we go, it's readier and readier, because metabolic health is more and more connected in the mentality of the consumer with what happens in the gut. Yeah. But the last product we've launched, that is the menopause that I was mentioning before, it's been the first one in this area. There's no other probiotic that has proved capacity to leverage estrabolome to increase the hormone levels of a menopausal woman. Yeah. So we've liked that, and that's in the DNA of our company, and we continue doing that, leveraging this gold mine of microbial friends that we own.
So, and that's where all the good stuff happens in research, right? Is the people that are willing to go out and pioneer and set a goal and then stick to it, right? And then figure out how they can reach that endpoint, which you guys have been doing. So 15 years, that's 15. How long
So if you guys want to finish off with this, I know a couple of things that I think would make everything more effective that people could do if they're doing these type of probiotics. Is one, to eliminate what you talked about, corn syrups, all these different syrups with fructose, because that will disturb the entire microbiome in the gut. And also the certain seed oils, especially omega-6, which are vegetable oils used in almost everything. Like, for instance, sunflower oil, canola oil, they're in everything, right? Safflower oil. Those are oils that are causing GI disturbance. And stay away from plastics, especially when you're taking plastics that are exposed to light and heat, or they're a liquid. And if that liquid is acidic in any way, it's basically, it's a constant thing. Even in all your health products, it's leaching into that thing and then you're taking it. So I'd say stay. So again, seed oils of the omega-6 variety, which are ubiquitous. Corn syrup, again, ubiquitous, the fructose in that. And stay away from plastics. So what else would you guys say? Would you maybe do or not do in combination with probiotics to make them more effective?
Obviously, prebiotics.
Yes,
fibers, different
Yeah.
types of fibers.
Yeah.
And you can get fibers from a supplement and you can get fibers
Yes.
from food.
Yes.
So eating well provides you with plenty of different fibers that do very well to your microbiome. But even there is an established concept that is the symbiotic. And in symbiotics, not 1 + 1 = 2. So when
Yes.
you get the fiber in a probiotic, doesn't do like
1 + 1 = 3 kind of thing. Yeah.
or 4 or 5.
Yes.
And there's very interesting research that we've done and other people has done around that. But if you have to combine probiotics with something, either healthy food or a particularly selected type of fiber.
And for people that have like long-term issues they're struggling with, right? Like I experienced this when I finished competing in high-level endurance sport. It took years for my gut to actually come back to really being perfect, and I was fine. Like I wasn't, luckily I didn't have other symptoms and things, but I guess I just want to give like not hope, but like just a bit more sort of encouragement to people that are really dealing with serious digestive issues. It does take time.
It takes time.
Stuff.
You got to be patient. You cannot expect the probiotic to work the next week.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that the consumer should understand that microbiome is like a garden. Again, it's a great example. And you grow your flowers, you grow your groceries, whatever, and then it takes time to grow it. It starts sprouting and it grows up, and then we'll get fruits, and then we'll repeat it. You need to be patient and keep tailoring what you do in terms of interventions to make it, thrive and become what you expect it to be.
And most studies are 16 weeks. Is that a normal?
It depends on the trials, and there are trials that are 6 weeks time, 4 weeks time, 12 weeks time. So again, it depends the probiotic, it depends the effect.
So there's a pragmatic way to look at the ancient way again, is they often did, because they come up, say the number 7 comes up all the time, sacred number. You could say 7 weeks, 7 days, 49 days, 49 days, do something. Mentally, energetically, physically combine, you form a new habit. That's all. Sometimes it's just that, right? And you're forming a new habit by it's a ritual. It's also a ritual. And you are, if you look at it, you say, I'm doing something that's good for me. I'm eliminating something that's not good for me in that together. And I'm doing it for a certain amount of time, pick the amount of time. And it's going to change your life. But that was just like ancient ways. And I think it just makes sense to us. It's about repetition, doing something new. That's just like, it's not rocket science. It's kind of like, that's normal. Then you feel like, hey, I am actually empowered. I can actually do this. I don't need to know all these technical terms and all this stuff. I just need to actually do it and see, yeah. And it's there. I'm super excited, way beyond what I thought I would ever be in the last couple of years because of you guys, what you've exposed me to about what probiotics can do above and beyond just taking them for digestive health, and something that you should do.
It's good science.
Yeah,
there's
So
good
about
science.
at the end of the day.
Yeah. Good science and bad science, and this is some good science here. Yeah, so I love learning about this stuff. I love experiencing these things, and that's at the end of the day what people want, right? Is to improve their health, quality of life, and so we've got many clinical trials to back it up with products that we offer, and lots of other good ones on the market as well. So any last words for our listeners, Jordi? That
there's one thing that I'm always liking to end up with is that not all science that matters for delivering interesting stuff to the end consumers is science that is applied to end products. So if we're capable to describe all these mechanisms, it's because there is a basic science discovery that has opened new research ideas to create extraordinary products in the long run. But basic science is super important to understand what microbiome do. And actually, that connects with the first point we touched based on. That is, a few years ago, we thought that probiotics were doing just helping for diarrhea associated to antibiotics, and that you would put something that would seed your gut. And now we know that they don't do that. They do much more things. They are present everywhere, and they do more beyond even your mucosa, so on your skin, on your eyes, on your mouth, on your everywhere. And that's no longer just a matter of helping with antibiotics. And if we discovered all that, and if we can talk about all these products, is because before that there were researchers that characterized the mechanisms of the gut permeability, that characterized the enteropathic cycle of bile salts, and that let us, ideate or imagine different ways to solve problems with products with good, applied science. But the underlying foundation is this basic research.
Nice. Yeah. So thank you to all those people before us, eh?
There we go.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right on. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was great.
That was fun. I learned a lot too.
Yeah.
It's, I love hanging out with smart people that are smarter than me. It's great.
It's awesome. Yeah. You got it. It's great.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you.
Right on.